It was just another ordinary early morning, silent and seemingly calm, like so many others he had lived through before. The house was plunged into an almost palpable stillness, with the clock slowly marking the hours and shadows stretching along the bedroom walls. He was about to fall asleep, feeling the weight of exhaustion accumulated in his body and mind after a long day, when something strange broke that calm dot. It was a whisper, so faint that at first it almost went unnoticed. A sound so light and muffled, it seemed to come from the silence itself. An almost imperceptible whisper, sounding as if someone was calling his name from the darkness that filled the room. He blinked several times, trying to convince himself it was just a product of his tired imagination, perhaps a remnant of a restless dream, or even the distant echo of thoughts that insisted on creeping in when the mind should be resting. He tried to rationalize, telling himself it was just the sound of the wind, the creaking of the house, or the subtle noises of the night filling every empty space with its mysteries. But the feeling did not disappear. On the contrary, it grew, stronger, like a growing shadow threatening to swallow the tranquility he thought he had. The air in the room seemed denser, as if it had lost some of its natural lightness. An invisible, silent, and indescribable presence began to roam the space, spreading an uneasiness he had never felt before. His heart started to race for no apparent reason, a rapid and erratic pulse invading his chest, while a cold shiver ran down his spine, raising the hairs on his arms. Even with the lights off, that dark void seemed alive, watching him, waiting for something he still did not understand. He slowly turned to his side, breath caught, trying to locate the origin of that whisper, but nothing answered him except the deep silence of the night. For a moment, he thought about turning on the light, seeking some comfort in the artificial brightness, but something stopped him. Maybe fear, maybe the uncomfortable certainty that if he did, something in that dark space would be revealed. And he was not ready to face it. It was at that moment, in that cold and restless early morning, that he realized for the first time that something out of the ordinary was happening. An uneasiness far beyond physical tiredness and daily routine. Something that disturbed his mind and spirit, something he could not simply ignore. He then tried to close his eyes and pretend nothing was happening, that it was all just a trick of his weary mind. But the voices continued, the whispers persisted, and that feeling of being watched never left him. That night would mark the beginning of a dark and mysterious journey, full of invisible presences, voices calling him from the darkness, and secrets he had never even imagined existed. A journey that would give him no rest, that would change his life forever, opening doors to a hidden world where fear, doubt, and the search for answers would become his constant companions. Even after a whole night trying to rest, he woke up feeling a fatigue that seemed heavier than when he had gone to sleep. It was a strange tiredness, different from the usual physical exhaustion after a hard day. It was as if his body was exhausted. For no reason, a deep weariness that seeped into every muscle, every bone, making his movements heavy and slow, as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. Upon opening his eyes, the feeling was already one of weariness, a sensation that neither the bed, the pillow, nor the morning silence could ease. But the worst was not just his body. His mind seemed trapped in a dense, impenetrable fog, as if wrapped in a cloak of confusion and darkness. Thoughts that once flowed clearly now came jumbled, difficult to organize. Concentration was compromised. Daily tasks demanded much greater effort, and small routine activities began to seem like impossible mountains to climb. That mental exhaustion drained the energy to smile, to talk, to connect with the people around him. It was as if he was there, but not truly present at work. Mistakes began to multiply. Patience, once abundant, dwindled with every passing moment. Irritation appeared out of nowhere, without explanation, and the feeling of discouragement quietly grew. The clock seemed to spin faster, and all he wanted was to escape that suffocating reality that consumed him from within. At night, sleep was difficult, restless, interrupted by strange sensations and a constant feeling of unease that kept him from relaxing. He couldn't understand what was happening to himself. Why was this fatigue, which never went away, seeming stronger every day? Why, even while sleeping, did he feel increasingly exhausted, as if something invisible was draining his strength, sucking the vital energy that once pulsed inside him? It was a silent struggle, invisible to others' eyes, but very real to him. And deep down, there was a growing fear, a silent warning that this was not just ordinary tiredness. Something was wrong. Something was taking away his peace, his health, his balance. But what exactly? He still didn't know. He only knew that he needed to find answers, because continuing like this was impossible. He could no longer deny what he was feeling. This was not a product of a tired imagination, nor delirium caused by interrupted sleep. Something was really there, something silently moving around the bed while he pretended to be asleep, trying to convince himself it was just a fleeting hallucination. But the truth was very different, and impossible to ignore. In the deepest hours of the early morning, when the house's silence becomes absolute and the world seemed suspended, he felt a presence moving, almost like a floating shadow, gliding through the room. There was not enough light to reveal shapes or faces, but the sensation was clear. Something wandered there, breathed in the heavy air, and watched him, invisible, almost touching his skin. A cold shiver ran down his spine with every movement. He sensed around him chills without reason that made him curl up inside the blanket, trying to find some comfort and protection. It was as if invisible hands were caressing his skin, cold and delicate, leaving a trail of deep uneasiness. Every time he tried to open his eyes to see what was happening, the shadow seemed to retreat, disappearing before it could be caught by sight. The room, which had once been just a familiar and safe space, transformed into a scene of growing tension, where fear silently settled, corroding the peace he still tried to keep. The sounds of the night, the slight creak of the wood, the wind hitting the window, took on a sinister tone, as if part of a secret communication between that presence and him. He tried, more than once, to get up, turn on the light, seek rational explanations for what he felt, but fear paralyzed his muscles, and the certainty that something there did not want to be disturbed made him hesitate. The uneasiness grew, along with the feeling that this was no ordinary visitor. It was something there to stay, with a hidden purpose, and it would not let him sleep peacefully again. That night, as in many nights to come, the shadows in the alley room and the unexplained chills became constant companions, threatening to invade his dreams and turn his life into a silent, invisible torment. Every time he closed his eyes, a voice would emerge, subtle, cold, like a thread of icy air brushing his ear, too close to be ignored. It was a whisper carrying a disturbing intimacy, a voice that seemed to know every secret, every fear hidden deep within his soul. That sound, almost imperceptible, was not just any noise. It was a presence invading his mind, crossing the barrier of consciousness and touching his very essence. At first, he tried to rationalize, telling himself it was just the echo of his thoughts, the result of sleepless nights and accumulated stress. But the whisper didn't limit itself to murmuring disconnected words. It said his name with a frightening precision, as if it were right there in the room, whispering right next to him. That simple detail made everything far more sinister, because it showed that this invisible entity was not random. It connected directly to him, cruelly and specifically choosing him. The voice came with a cold, empty tone, as if it did not belong to any human being, but to something that existed between the world of the living and the dead. There was no compassion or explicit malice, just an unsettling presence filling the space between fear and doubt. Every time he heard his name in that icy whisper, his heart raced and his mind plunged into a whirlwind of dark thoughts, doubts, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. He knew that whisper was not just a sound, it was a form of contact, an attempt to establish an invisible bond, pulling him toward an unknown abyss, where reason and logic gave way to the silent terror that ruled his nights. And you, have you ever heard a whisper or a voice that seemed to truly know you, even when no one else was around? Share in the comments the scariest experience you've ever had. I really want to know. He felt the weight of loneliness like never before. That silent, almost paralyzing fear that kept him from speaking about what he was going through. How could he tell someone that voices whispered his name in the silence of the night? That an invisible presence seemed to invade his house, his room, his very body. Who would believe him? Doubt gnawed at his mind like a constant shadow that crept ever closer. Even the people closest to him, family, friends, co-workers, responded with words of comfort that, to him, sounded like veiled accusations. It's just stress. You're too tired. It's all in your head. It was as if his pain was invisible, his anguish ignored or minimized by those who should have understood the most. And deep down, that hurt more than any whisper in the darkness. The fear of being judged, of seeming weak, or even losing the little credibility he had made him stay silent. Silence became his refuge, but also his prison. He lived a deep spiritual loneliness, a feeling of being completely alone in an invisible battle that no one saw, no one understood. That shame of exposing his vulnerability was a poison that corroded his soul. Every time he wanted to share his story, the words got stuck in his throat, suffocated by the fear of scorn or ridicule. He knew he needed help, but the barrier of fear was too high to overcome in the silence of that loneliness. The struggle became even more cruel. The world went on outside as usual, while inside him an invisible storm destroyed his peace and balance. And you? Have you ever felt so alone and misunderstood that you preferred to keep everything to yourself? How did you deal with the fear of opening your heart? Leave your answer in the comments. Let's create a space of support and understanding together. He never really believed much in dreams, until that fateful night when everything changed. In the midst of restless and fragmented sleep, he saw something he could never forget, a figure standing in the corner of the room, motionless, staring at him with a gaze that seemed to pierce his soul. It wasn't an ordinary dream, nor a simple image formed by a tired mind. It was something much deeper, a sign, a silent message that his subconscious was picking up, an open door to a hidden and dark world. In the dimness of the dream, the figure had no clearly defined face, but its presence was terrifyingly real. The silence between them seemed to scream, and the air around him grew heavy, charged with an energy that made him feel a mix of fear and fascination. He knew that face, though nebulous and distant, represented something important, perhaps a warning, a call, or even a connection that transcended visible reality. The symbolic terror of that vision was etched in his mind like an indelible mark. He realized that dreams were not just random images. They were spiritual channels, bridges between the conscious and the invisible, where fear and mystery intertwined to reveal truths that during the day remained hidden. His subconscious was on alert, trying to warn him of something he still could not fully understand. Since that night, the simple act of closing his eyes became a risk, for he feared reliving that encounter, feeling again the weight of that gaze that seemed to penetrate his essence and reveal his deepest fears. And you? Have you ever had a dream so vivid and frightening that it felt more real than life itself? A dream that seemed to want to show you something important? Leave a like if you've experienced this, and share in the comments the dream that left the biggest impression on you. I want to hear your story." The nights, which once brought a minimum of rest, had become true tortures. Each time darkness fell, the anguish grew, consuming his soul and stealing any trace of peace that might still exist. Sleep, which used to be a natural refuge, simply disappeared. He stopped sleeping. The early hours of the morning were marked by a terrifying silence, broken only by his own muffled sobs and involuntary tremors. The feeling of being completely alone, surrounded by invisible forces that seemed to feed on his fear, crushed him. He cried silently, with a tight heart, feeling the overwhelming weight of despair. His prayers, which once were a source of comfort, now echoed into the void unanswered. It was as if an invisible wall blocked any connection, a cold silence that only amplified his torment. The spiritual torment had reached its peak. The invisible entity, which once whispered and moved in the shadows, now made itself felt with an overwhelming intensity, almost tangible. It was a direct attack on his mind, on his spirit, a negative presence that seemed to want to tear away all that remained of hope and light. Fear turned into despair, and despair into a silent struggle for his own sanity. He felt trapped in a labyrinth with no exit, where every step took him deeper into a darkness that threatened to swallow everything. Human fragility seemed exposed and vulnerable before that invisible torment, and he wondered if he would ever be able to live in peace again, if any light could still shine in that endless night. After endless nights of torment and despair, he finally reached a point where he could no longer deny the reality consuming him. This was not madness, nor mere imagination. Something very real was happening, something beyond his rational understanding. It was in this painful moment of acceptance that he decided to take a crucial step. To seek help. The journey to find answers was not easy. Amid doubts, fears, and the lingering shame, he began looking for someone who could see beyond the visible, someone with knowledge and power to face what terrified him. That's how he crossed paths with figures who would bring new hope to his life. A pastor with unwavering faith, a medium sensitive to invisible energies, and a spiritual therapist experienced in battling the forces of darkness. Each meeting brought a mix of relief and tension, a new understanding of what he was facing. The pastor, with his firm and conviction-filled voice, taught him to strengthen his faith, prayer, and spiritual protection. The medium, in turn, revealed the hidden layers of that presence, helping to identify the origin of the spiritual obsession and showing ways to break the invisible ties that bound him. The spiritual therapist offered techniques, rituals, and guidance to cleanse negative energy, restore balance, and reclaim inner peace. It was a slow and arduous battle, but from that point on, he began to recover something he thought was lost: control over his life, hope for better days, and the certainty that he was not alone. Spiritual help was not just a resource. It was the light in the darkness, the outstretched hand pulling him out of that abyss. And you? Have you ever needed to seek spiritual help to overcome difficult times? Or do you know someone who went through something similar? Leave your comment and share your experience. Your story might be the hope someone needs today. And you? Have you ever experienced something unexplainable or felt a presence no one else could see? How did you deal with it? Tell us in the comments. Your story can help and comfort others going through the same. Don't forget to leave a like if this story gave you chills. After so much suffering and tireless searching for answers, he finally received a diagnosis that, although unexpected, made sense of everything he had been through. They told him he was a sensitive person, someone with a heightened spiritual perception, able to sense energies unnoticed by most. However, this sensitivity brought consequences he never imagined. He had absorbed a dense and negative energy that fed on his fear, anguish, and suffering. This is what many call spiritual anxiety, a state of deep unrest not only of the mind, but of the spirit. caused by the invasion of forces that seek to drain the vitality and inner peace of those who are vulnerable. More than simple anxiety, it was a sign that something greater and darker was at play. It was then that he heard about spiritual obsessors, invisible entities that attach themselves to people with emotional or spiritual weaknesses, creating a dangerous cycle of suffering and energetic drainage. These obsessors act like invisible vampires, sucking the vital energy and increasing fear, discouragement, and internal chaos in their victims, making them easy prey for a dark and suffocating reality. This diagnosis brought a mixture of relief and fear. Relief at finally understanding what he was facing, but fear knowing that this battle would not be easy, as he now understood the gravity of the presence that accompanied him, not just a shadow, but a true spiritual parasite feeding on his pain. But the truth is, by knowing his enemy, he also found the first step toward liberation. Understanding what spiritual anxiety and obsessing presences are opened the way for real strategies of protection, healing, and strengthening of the soul. And you? Have you heard about spiritual anxiety or obsessive entities? Do you feel that? Some negative energy is draining your strength? Share your experience in the comments. Let's seek the light together amid the darkness. He knew he could no longer wait passively for that invisible presence to simply leave him in peace. It was time to act, to take control of his life into his own hands and seek the liberation he so desperately desired. Thus began a delicate but powerful process of rituals, prayers, and purification, essential steps to drive away the negative energies that held him captive and restore harmony to his body, mind, and spirit. The first step was herbal baths, traditional and ancient methods of energetic cleansing that used the natural power of plants to renew the body's vibrations and repel unwanted influences. Herbs like rue, rosemary, guinea henweed, and basil were carefully chosen, each with specific properties for protection and purification. The bath ritual was not just physical, it was a moment of spiritual connection, where he visualized all negativity being washed away, leaving only light and inner strength. Additionally, he incorporated powerful prayers into his daily routine. Sacred words, recited with faith and intention, creating an invisible protective shield around his energy. These prayers were not mere requests for help, but affirmations of his will to break free, to reclaim the peace the obsessing presence tried to steal. Faith, at that moment, became an essential weapon against fear. Energetic cleansing of the home also took on a fundamental role. The environment where he lived needed purification, as the accumulated negative energies affected not only his body, but also the space around him. Burning incense, spreading coarse salt in the corners, using specific crystals, and performing cleansing prayers became daily rituals to ensure harmony returned to that place. It was a slow process, requiring patience and determination, but with every ritual, every prayer, he felt a small victory, a light beginning to shine at the end of the tunnel. Fear still existed, but hope grew stronger, along with the certainty that it was possible to overcome that invisible battle. And you? Have you ever tried any ritual or spiritual practice to protect or purify your energy? Do you have any techniques you'd like to share? Leave a like if you believe in the power of faith, and share your experience in the comments. Together, we can strengthen our journey. After an intense period of struggle, he finally felt the voice had disappeared. The presence that tormented him during the nights, whispering his name and moving around the bed, seemed to have vanished. Silence took the place of terror, bringing a relief so deep it was almost unbelievable. The darkness, once oppressive and full of threatening shadows, began to give way to the faint light of hope. But although that invisible entity had withdrawn, he understood something fundamental. Spiritual vigilance must never cease. The battle he fought was not just against a passing presence, but against a continuous cycle of energies that seek to take advantage of gaps left by lack of protection and attention. The experience taught him that the peace gained is delicate and needs to be nurtured daily. The negative presence can return, especially if care is abandoned. What seemed like an end might be just a pause, an opportunity to strengthen internal and external defenses. That's why he maintained his rituals, prayers, and spiritual connection, knowing that protection is a constant commitment, a shield that must always be raised. This story is not just about fear or suffering. It is a powerful reminder that spiritual life requires respect, care, and attention. Invisible forces are always present, waiting to act, but also waiting to be faced with courage and faith. And you, how do you maintain your spiritual protection in everyday life? Have you ever gone through moments when you thought the battle was over, but felt the need to stay alert? Leave your comment, share your strategies, and help strengthen this support network. If this story touched you, leave a like and help spread this important message. Do you feel like something is draining your peace? That even in moments when everything should be calm, an invisible restlessness steals your energy, your balance, and your mental clarity? Don't ignore these signs. They are alerts from your body, your mind, and above all, your spirit, asking for attention and care. Spiritual protection is not something distant or inaccessible. It is within reach of all who wish to strengthen their inner light. Meditating, praying, and practicing energetic cleansing rituals are powerful tools to maintain balance and harmony amid life's invisible storms. These moments of deep connection with yourself and the divine are the true shield against the forces that try to weaken us. Faith, in all its forms, is an inexhaustible source of strength and resilience. It does not mean the absence of fear, but the courage to face shadows with the certainty that the inner light is greater. Cultivating awareness of our energy, thoughts, and emotions is essential to identify when something is out of place and to act before the wear becomes irreversible. Remember, your mind and spirit are your most precious treasures. Protect them with care, attention, and determination. Seek the peace that comes from self-knowledge and true connection with what is most sacred within you. And you, how do you take care of your inner peace? What spiritual or self-care practices help you keep your energy balanced? Share your experience in the comments and strengthen this chain of light and protection. If this message resonated with you, leave a like and spread this reflection to those who need to hear it today. If you want to keep receiving stories that awaken your consciousness and lessons to protect your soul, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss anything.